Hello everyone, I'm currently in a hotel for a Riftbound skirmish in Warsaw, so sorry for the audio and video quality. There's actually a camera in the corner. Hello, I'm there. Hello, I'm very small. Anyway, today's video is very important. It's about the locations in Spiritforged, and I think there are some phenomenal ones that will be incredibly important in the new metagame. So let's go. And as always, it's from trash to meta defining, so from 1 to 6 stars. Before I explain why I think this location is earning 5 stars, let me just briefly talk about locations themselves. I think it's fascinating how Riftbound is being affected by the locations mechanic in its first place. We'll take, for example, Alan and his teammate Randy. They both play Kaisers, they have completely different playstyles, and because of that, they choose completely three different locations. One is mainly starting with Reverse Road, that's Alan's deck, which then relies more on fighting around those locations and affecting the opponents with debuffs and like trying to save the units. Like Alan is trying to save his units more than fight against the opponent's units, you know? But then you have Randy, who is like having a completely the opposite type of playstyle. He has locations that allow him to play more spells, to draw more cards, so they are less neutral. That actually can be even very positive for the opponent as well, but he is running so much removal, like 3 Icathian Rain, that he's capable of playing that way because he is not gonna run out of steam and has multiple value cards that are essentially ignoring the fact that opponent can also benefit from his locations, like for example the Dreaming Tree, right? So he plays less units but more spells, and that is supplemented by the locations themselves. And I think in Spiritforged, we're gonna have so many good locations that are gonna be showing a very specific direction in which decks might lean into. And that's fantastic because when it comes to the metagame, we're gonna have very similar decks, but that are gonna play completely differently because of different locations. All right, let's talk about Emperor's Dais or Dais. I don't know how to read that. When you conquer here, you may pay 1 energy and return a unit you control here to its owner's hand. If you do, play a 2 Might Sand Soldier token unit here. Now this is a incredibly interesting location. First that comes to mind, everyone will say, wow, that's perfect for Azir. Well, actually it's not. Actually it's a horrible location for Azir, I think. And maybe I'm wrong, but when I went through like the units and when I went through like in my head how Azir would like to play, essentially this location doesn't really get him anything because you cannot just bounce a token to your hand because then the token gets banished, right? So you can only bounce real units. If you bounce real units, you would like to have an additional form of value in form of, for example, enter the battlefield effect, like the Yordle, the blue Yordle that for 3 mana draws your card. You play him on 3 resources, you enter this location on 5 resources, you conquer, you get a point, you pay 1, you get the Yordle back into your hand, so you increase your card advantage, and for 1 resource, you still leave a unit that will defend that location. Now, that is a value engine that will be possible to be done with units that have an enters the game effect, and that is not yellow and not green, at least not for Azir, I think. And that is very interesting because this will also not benefit a lot of the decks. So for example, this location is great against any kind of ramp deck because ramp decks are gonna have very incredibly expensive creatures. So they don't want to bounce them typically, unless of course, they don't really care about how they hold the locations because maybe they will have a Deathbloom Predator that will just be bounced and then replayed next turn. But I don't think that will happen that often. Anyway, the point is, this benefits cheap creatures, so typically 2 drops, maybe 3 drops, where you bouncing them doesn't really cost you might because they're going to have very similar statistics. And because of that, I think this is a great location for a deck that plays either purple, blue, or red, and will have those kind of creatures that have value when they enter. And then you think about this location as an additional draw cards for which you just pay 1 energy. So essentially, think about it also this way, like you have a vein, just every single unit that you have in your deck will be a vein with this kind of location, right? So I think it's incredibly cool, and I give it 5 stars because I think it's a valid choice for a lot of decks. And I don't think it's going to be meta defining, but I think it's a great location because it's being able to be played against a lot of decks where they don't get much value out of it, while you can get a lot of value yourself. All right, now we have Power Nexus. When you hold here, you may pay 4 power to score 1 point. I'm giving it 6 stars. It's a asymmetrical greatest arena with a macro objective. Think about it this way. If you play League of Legends, this kind of feels like a Baron, right? If you get it, you are pushing towards closing out the game. And most likely, a location like Power Nexus can only be used once in a game, and that's gonna be enough. So just hold it once and you pay 4 power. You can float energy at the same time, so you don't lose the tempo during the same turn when you hold this and get 25% of the points that you need to get in the game. When you look at that perspective, suddenly this becomes incredibly powerful, right? Because it doesn't matter if you deramp, if you win the game, you still have the energy for that turn, which is incredibly important. And I feel like, think about it this way. This is arena greatest that only works for one player. Now, obviously, your opponent will also have this objective. So this is going to be interesting choice of a battleground because it kind of speeds up the game, but at the same time kind of doesn't, because it puts more objectives against for your opponents to like get you off that location. It's gonna definitely make some suboptimal plays happen during the game because you cannot lose this macro objective. Not gonna lie, I thought that in the world of TCGs, there were so many different TCGs that not many new mechanics will like surprise me, but Riftbound is really fantastic. Like the amount of stuff that is kind of the old stuff that you have seen in other games, but with this new spin, and because of that, the entire game just feels like completely brand new, is very refreshing. And I love learning this game. And again, I'm not an expert. I'm learning alongside you guys, right? All of this is a exploration and gaining knowledge and learning from your own mistakes, which is something that I love in games. So locations like Power Nexus are one of those key tools to understand the game on a deeper level that I feel like it's gonna be a topic of conversation for the next months to come. So yeah, 6 stars. Next one is Forge of the Fluft. I mean, hilarious artwork. Anyway, while you control this battlefield, friendly legends have tap, attach an equipment to control to a unity control. Now, it's kind of interesting that this is the new type of locations. You get an effect while you control it. So for the first time in the game, we're gonna have an additional incentive to be on a location instead of, for example, holding it, gaining points, and then falling back to the base. It's very interesting because it's going to affect sequencing. It's going to also affect decision making when it comes to, should I stay on this location, benefit from it additionally, or not, right? In this particular case, I don't think this one is very good because one, it only works when you have equipment, which is going to be very niche in the first place, right? And two, it's like you're gonna limit the amount of uses that you're gonna get out of your own legend. So if you have Jax, why would you play that with Jax? If you have Azir, for example, it's just better to, play a unit, right? So there's few things about this location that make it awkward to use. At the same time, if you're in a need of a very neutral location that doesn't get a value for any of the players, typically, I would say this is a great choice. But yeah, it's a symmetrical effect that essentially is asymmetrical, because unless your opponent is also playing equipment, then he has zero uses out of the Forge of the Fluft, while you can. But again, you have to think, does your character at all benefit from the fact that it gets another effect on how to utilize its tap? Forgotten Monument is the first location that I'm gonna give 6 stars in this review. Players can score here until their 3rd turn. Now, in current metagame of just Ornn, a location like this would be beloved by Yi or Misfortune, so the slower decks which benefit from prolonged games. Even more like a Yi mid-range who would like to go into one of the locations and just hold that location and force the opponents to go into him to fight the one soul creature that is holding the auto location, because why on earth would you would like to get to Forgotten Monument, because you cannot score points there anyway, right? So I don't exactly know how it's gonna work with the hold during the third turn. Like if you go on the second turn to this location and then the third turn starts, I'm not certain if the score will be granted for holding. We're gonna have to wait for like comprehensive rules. I'm maybe that will be the case, but we'll have to see. Anyway, this is a great location. It funnels your opponents, like the aggressive opponents, into only one location, and in some cases, like against an Annie deck right now, it would mean that the Annie cannot use a deck hand to get another point in the turn number 2, essentially, right? So this is a very cool location for the slower decks, and it's gonna be definitely a choice for most of them. Next is gonna be Hall of Legends. When you concur here, you may pay 1 energy to ready your legend. I'm giving it 4 stars because I feel like it's one of those locations that might actually be pretty safe against a lot of the enemies, but at the same time, it's not really that viable for a lot of legends themselves. Like, for example, this is basically what Irelia has already built into her own legend, right? So, well, yeah, it's good in Irelia, but she has this built in. She doesn't have to concur, like, this location, this specific location. Then we have Sethu, for example, has this built in as well, but without even paying a resource if you just concur, right? So who would benefit from it? I feel like we have 2 archetypes, which are token generation archetypes that would benefit from this, and that's of course Victor and Azir. So obviously those locations would be chosen by those 2 characters. And then we have legends maybe like Kaisa, who would like to untap to essentially produce more energy that can come handy from time to time. So essentially this location, when you think about it, is a easy neutral choice if the meta game doesn't have a lot of token generation like characters like Azir or Victor, because then most characters will actually not benefit from this. Many of the characters that you have in the game, they can't even tap the legend because there's no point. Like, for example, the Lucian or the Rumble, or who else? Well, there's definitely more. But from Spiritforged, one of the characters that I think would benefit from this maybe would be Fiora, because she would be able to ramp twice, although that's very hard to do because you would have to make mighty 2 units at the same time. So maybe with like the punch first, but then you pay 4 power for 2 units, so you would have to have 2 units that become mighty when you play punch first for 2 energy, then you pay 4 resources, as in you recycle 4 runes, and then you get some of them back, like 2 of them. So yeah, this is, never mind. You know what, it's just an okay location that is neutral against most. Marai Spire is, while you control this battlefield, friendly repeat cost 1 less. Fantastic wording, by the way. Thank you, Riot. And it doesn't have a minimum. So essentially, if the repeat cost is 1, it's going to be 0, right? Obviously, if there's a power cost, you're going to have to pay. But this is a great location. I'm giving it 6 stars because it's, again, an example of a location that you can benefit from it a lot, but your opponent will have 0 benefits, for example, because he will not play any repeat card. Now, from current stand on how many cards we have in Spiritforged when it comes to the repeat mech, the biggest beneficiary of this location would be red with the pump, which essentially then becomes you pay one energy to get +4 assault. Then you have piercing light, which would be 3 energy and 2 power to deal 4 damage to 2 creatures, which one can be in base, right? So that's pretty powerful. Then we have green color, which has actually 3 cards. So you would not like to play this against a green color, most likely. You're going to have Desert's Call, which creates units, and that is a fantastic card. Then you have Twonk, which stuns 2 attacking creatures, when the repeat is paid, of course, and Pharaoh's Strength, which is +2 might for 2 energy, and then on repeat, it will just be 1 energy for +2. So it would be over the normal rate because you would pay 3 energy for +4 might. So I feel like depending on the metagame, this is gonna be a highly chosen arena specifically for green, red, but also purple, because Hard Bargain is also a card that exists, and that would make it very nice. Right, when you can pay just one for repeat to for opponent to lose 2 energy, so you're like gaining tempo essentially within a small margin. But overall, I feel like this is something that can be chosen safely into most decks. And remember, you have to control this battlefield. So it also changes the sequencing. Like if you play red color, for example, you could first attack with a unit to conquer this and then play Piercing Light. So there's more interaction between what your opponent can do because a showdown will open. It's a very interesting and nuanced situation. So, but I still think this is deserving of 6 stars. Now we have Minefield. I'm giving it 2 stars, but we have to kind of explain why. It says when you concur here, put 2 top cards of your main deck into your trash. Now, you could say, wait, this is great in some of the decks, and yes, that is correct. It would be great in the Discard Reanimator Mundo decks, for example, right? So essentially, this is made for purple color, and purple color only, alongside with some sprinkle of blue when it comes to Mundo, right? And we also have to remember about the new Fizz character that is going to be in the game. Annie, for example, the champion unit can recycle your card that you have in your trash, right? So essentially you kind of have like a bigger array of tools to choose from. So there is some use case for this. But at the same time, that is just that one type of deck, essentially. Purple, blue is the one that would like to play this location, and for them, that is a great location. But because of that, I'm giving it 2 stars. We're probably not gonna see a lot of it in the metagame unless a deck archetype will emerge that it's gonna be like, you know, the top dog in the entire metagame. It's gonna take like 35% of the entire pie, which I don't think will happen. Right, so yeah, it's a nice tool, but we're probably not gonna see much of it. Ornn's Forge says, while you control this battlefield, the first friendly non-token gear played each turn costs 1 less. Also, no minimum, right? So if it's a gear for 1, it will cost 0. It's very important. I'm giving it 6 stars, even though it goes a little bit against what I explained before, because if the meta game is gonna revolve around equipment, and I don't think it will, by the way, because there's just too much hate cards that can be flying around to make an sole equipment deck like with a focus on that. But because of that, actually Ornn's Forge might be more prevalent, because if the less equipment decks you're gonna have in the metagame, the more beneficiary a deck who runs Ornn's Forge is. Right? And then you have decks that would really love to use this. So obviously Ornn, obviously Jax, those are the 2 main beneficiaries. To some degree, probably Lucian, although I don't think it's gonna be a great character, and Irelia. Now, Irelia probably is gonna just run a very limited amount of equipment, but so it's not gonna be that big of a problem, right? Also, remember, you have to control this battlefield to be a beneficiary of its effect. So yeah, it all depends what kind of strategies players will be choosing with those decks. But I feel like Ornn might be the one that would actually like to hold this location and just play those gear cards all the time. Now, again, whenever I talk about equipment and gear, I just see that red color and the thermo beam, and yeah, I don't know, man. It's gonna be a topic for a different video, but I feel like equipment decks are not gonna be a thing. That we're gonna see some of it being played. Like I said, for example, in the green color review, Styrax is amazing and meta defining, but I don't think that there's gonna be many cards like that. So yeah, we'll see. But anyway, this location, again, 6 stars, because if the meta doesn't revolve around equipment, but you have an equipment deck, then this is gonna be super playable. All right, now we have Ravenbloom Conservatory. When you defend here, reveal the top card of your main deck. If it's a spell, put it in your hand, otherwise recycle it. Obviously, synergy with Ravenbloom Student. How did they come up with this? I don't know. Anyway, I feel like this is an okay location. The problem is that every single deck plays spells, right? Like every single deck in the game plays spells, even when they're like unit concentrated decks, like a set deck, for example, they still have around 9 to 12 spells. Deck like Kaisa will around 19, 20, sometimes even more spells. So definitely there would be a beneficiary of this kind of location. Unfortunately, I don't think that this is like as neutral as you think it could be. Now, depending how the metagame evolves, maybe Kaisa still is gonna be in charge. Maybe it's gonna be a popular deck, and then Ravenbloom Conservatory was gonna be giving you fuel for those spells, and you just bang that your opponent gets unlucky. But at the same time, like because of that, maybe this should have 3 stars. I think like the effect is too symmetrical for you to consider this deck, this location being in the deck, and I feel like it's so swingy and you can't really do much about it unless you play a deck that is able to stack the top of the deck. So, I wonder what that can be. Probably stack a deck, which is purple, right? And also remember, Rek'Sai, which is red and yellow, has the possibility of stacking your deck as well. Then suddenly this becomes a little bit more prominent, right? You are having a higher chance of getting that spell on the top of the deck when you're holding this location. And remember that this triggers when you start defending, so you're gonna have the chance to use this spell during the same combat that just started, which can be a huge deal in set combat. And yeah, of course, opponent will know what you're gonna draw if that was a spell. But I think that's fine if you just want to have card advantage and the possibilities of fighting more efficiently during the combat. Now, yeah, I mean, it's okay. It's a decent location, but the problem is it's a little bit too symmetrical. Rockfall Path. Units can't be played here. That's what it says. That's it. And when I read it, my first impression was like, whoa! But then I quickly just completely froze with my excitement because that's not that good. I'm giving it 2 stars. Now, why? Because it sounds great. But the problem is like your opponent has to control this location already. Then they have to play more units on the same location. That doesn't really happen that often in current metagame. Maybe that will change in the future. The decks that benefit from playing units on a specific piece of, on a specific battlefield would be, for example, orange and purple. Purple with the deckhand, for example. Orange has Deathbloom and also has this new small Deathbloom that is like a 4-drop with 1 power and 4 might that can be played on a battlefield that has an enemy, right? So then you are safe from that in this location from those kind of units. So, you know what? Actually, now when I think about it, maybe it's not as niche as I thought would be. Maybe I would like to play this in, for example, Kaisa, because I don't really play units on locations, and in this case, I force my opponent to also not do that on the. So hey, you know what? Maybe this is a little bit better than niche in this case. It's gonna be like a little bit more neutral. I don't know. I'm gonna keep my second impression about this location, which is gonna be 2 stars. But as I said before, those are entertainment videos, and at the end of the Spiritforged metagame, I'm gonna go through those extreme examples when I missed the mark on something, because there's definitely something gonna be like that, and we're gonna laugh at me at my own expense. All right, now we have Seat of Power. When you concur here, draw 1 for each other battlefield you or allies control. Now, I'm giving it 4 stars because it's very neutral, but at the same time, the only deck that would like to use that is an aggressive deck. So, for example, let's say Annie in current Origins metagame, you would actually be able to draw a card for no further expenses as fast as turn 2. Because turn 1 you play a unit, turn 2 you move that unit to one of the locations, so you get 1 point and you control the other one, and then you play a deckhand on this location, and suddenly not only you got 2 points, but you also drew a card. For a deck like Annie, that is actually incredibly important because you are a tempo deck that doesn't really care about how much mana you have. You just want to puke as many cards as possible or build a combo in your hand, which this location kind of helps you with, right? And then for slower decks, it's not as easy to control two locations at the same time because they play bigger creatures, so they're not going to have that many opportunities to control two locations at the same time. And because of that, aggressive decks will like to play with this location because of it. I think so, at least. So my first impression, like when I literally read it the first time, I put it on 1 star because I thought it's just like a location made for the multiplayer thingy. But then I just started thinking and I changed my mind. So Seat of Power looks like actually a cool location. Sunken Temple, when you concur here with one or more mighty units, you may pay 1 energy to draw 1 card. First impression when I read this, I thought this is pretty good. Then I started thinking, it actually turns out not to be that good. Obviously, the character in this particular expansion who would like to benefit from this is Fiora, because whenever you have a mighty unit, or when someone becomes mighty unit, so it starts from below 5 and then goes into 5 or more might, Fiora can just ramp for free by just tapping the legend. And then that unit comes here, gets an additional card that seems like a very valuable engine that will be capable of, sustaining the more amount of cards that you're gonna get because you are getting more resources. Now, the problem is that many aggressive decks will also benefit from this location because of cards like Cleave. If you cleave and you enter this and there's going to be a fight because it doesn't work in an open showdown, there's no assault in open showdowns, but if there's actual fight, then the cleave replaces itself, and that is a horrible deal for any deck. Like, you don't want to have against yourself a 2 mana 2 energy cleave that just draws 1. Like, that is not a good deal. And because of that, even like all the aggro decks, they still have creatures that have 5 might or more. Dais Trifarian is a perfect example. Like, would you like to, for 7 mana, for 7 energy, see a Dais Trifarian use Cleave or use Stupefy, go into location, earn a point, and then also pay 1 to draw a card? Like, that sounds pretty horrible to play against. So yeah, I'm giving Sunken Temple a 1 star because I think it's way too risky to run this location in probably any meta game. Papertree, when you hold here, each player channels 1 rune exhaust. So that is very similar location to the one where the opponents cannot earn points till 3rd turn. This essentially forces your opponent to not play into your own playstyle. Because if I'm playing a ramp deck and I want to play big creatures, your opponent will not like to hold Papertree, right? They're gonna try to take it and maybe move away from it for the same turn. That's problematic. But otherwise, you just funnel them into the other battlefield because most likely you're gonna benefit more from that 1 rune exhausted than your opponent, which plays a more aggressive deck and less value orientated, like some mid-range control-y build that you might run with the Papertree. So I'm giving it 5 stars because I feel like that's gonna be a very common choice for the bigger mid-rangey decks. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Treasure Hoard is when you concur here, you may pay 1 energy to play a gold gear token exhausted. First impression, I was also like, oh my god, this is 6 stars, this is phenomenal. But then again, I started thinking like, probably too symmetrical. Probably your opponent might actually benefit more from this than you will. And it's also harder to squeeze in that 1 mana, 1 energy when you're going first, right? This is a more location when you're going second because you are 1 resource ahead of your opponent, so it's easier to squeeze this in. But then if you squeeze this in, you're not really leaving a lot of energy to interact with your opponent during their turn, which is crucial in a game of Riftbound, typically, because if you lose, I can guarantee you, start thinking about it this way, when you lose a match, you can probably pinpoint that moment to where in game you are fully tapped out and your opponent can do whatever they want. That is probably the moment when you know that you lost. And Treasure Hoard will push you to be more in that position because you'd want to use more resources, but at the same time, no one forces you to. But then if no one forces you to, then why do you play this location? And your opponent might actually benefit from it even more than you do, depending on what kind of archetype they play, right? The more aggressive version of a deck the opponent you will play, the more they will benefit from Treasure Hoard because they're gonna be able to sustain a little bit better the tempo. And also remember, it creates a gear. If for some reason you're playing against a color that has synergy with gears, you might be in very big troubles. And the last location in the video, called Veiled Temple. When you concur here, you may ready a friendly gear. If it's an equipment, you may detach multiple ways of using this, which is always nice. And very similar talk when it comes to the Ornn Forge. If your opponent doesn't play a lot of gear, cards in general, then this location is not neutral, is a net positive for you. So it all depends on the metagame, but this card might be both trash and meta defining at the same time. Some decks, like I'm gonna give just more examples from set 1, but for example, Set, who plays an arena bar, would be able to get another buff token from that arena bar because he would untap it. Right? You can also just use one of your pieces of equipment to attack into a location. You win it because you have the might that will push it over the edge. And then when you concur here, you just move that equipment and put it on something else, for example, after using the equip cost, right? So this is pretty flexible, and because most of your opponents probably will not play equipment or gear or any kind of those branches of cards in their own deck, that will mean that you're gonna just benefit a lot more than your opponent. So it all depends on the metagame. Yeah, but it's definitely a nice location. So yeah, so as you can see here with all the stats from the review, I think Riot cooked us a very nice meal. Only 4 locations I deem on the worst side, while we have 11 of them being playable or essentially awesome or meta defining. So of course take this with a grain of salt. I didn't play a single game yet with set 2. All of this is just first impressions, but I'm very excited to see that the locations are so there are new direction in the game, but at the same time they have very bombastic effects, and they present you a new way of playing the game as well. So with every single set, we're gonna have so many new battlefields, and they're gonna be so exciting to include in your theory crafting. Anyway, thank you for watching. Sorry for the microphone and the camera and the production quality overall. We're gonna have more normal videos next week. Bye bye.